All right, thanks everybody for coming. We're here today to ask Governor Jay Nixon to commute the sentence of Jeff Mizanskey, who's serving a sentence of life without parole for the commission of marijuana crimes. Mr. Mizanskey's case is highly unusual. He's the only person in Missouri currently serving a sentence of life without parole for marijuana offenses. And thanks to the criminal code revision passed by this legislature in 2014, no future marijuana-only offenders will receive life without parole sentences, because we as a body collectively realize that this type of sentence is disproportionate for these types of offenses. In a world in which murderers and rapists often serve sentences of 10 years or less, and in which repeat DWI offenders aren't given much more than a slap on the wrist until and sometimes even if they cause someone else's death, it's unfair and unjust that Jeff Mizanskey has served over 20 years for using and selling marijuana. That injustice will be compounded if Jeff is allowed to die in prison, which is what will happen if Governor Nixon doesn't act to free him. However, this issue is not just about righting an injustice or about the $400,000 plus that we've spent over the past 20 years incarcerating a nonviolent marijuana offender. It's also about reuniting Jeff Mizanskey with his family, including his son Chris, his 7 grandchildren, and his 1 great-grandchild. Thanks to the efforts of Chris Mizanskey, Jeff's other family members who are in attendance, hundreds of activists throughout Missouri, and others, support for Jeff's clemency has become a popular rallying cry in our state. At the conclusion of this press conference, we will hand deliver 2 strong signs of that support to the governor's office. The first is these boxes here, nearly 400,000 signatures from a Change.org petition started by Chris Mizanskey from everyday citizens who signed this because they found it to be an injustice. The second show of support is going to be a letter that's been signed by 127 members of our General Assembly, nearly 2/3 of our legislators. The signees represent a geographically, ideologically, and racially diverse group, which includes almost 2/3 of the House Republican caucus. Now I'm going to turn it over to Chris Mizanskey, who will give a few brief remarks. Chris has been a tireless fighter for his father. He is himself a devoted father of a son, and I'm really glad to have him here. I'm really glad for all the work he's done on behalf of his father. Thank you, buddy.
My dad was a good man. He raised me right. He helped out a lot of family members and a lot of people in my community. He did get himself in a bit of trouble, and he's done quite a bit of time for it. I know deep down in my heart that he would do way better things for people out here on the streets, and I'm quite sure that there's so many more people he would help if he could get out. And I miss my dad very much. I mean, my whole family does. There's no words that can explain how much it would mean to have my dad back in my life and out of that penitentiary. To be with my family. He's an older man, he ain't got much time left, and I would like for him to be able to spend it with his grandchildren, his children, and his family that really, really miss him. Thank you very much.
And next up, we're going to have Representative Paul Fitzwater, who's chairman of the Corrections Committee. I'd like to thank him for his leadership on this issue, for hearing the bill, passing it out of his committee, getting it to the Select Committee. I'd also like to thank Representative Kevin Austin, who's the chair of the Select Committee on Judiciary, which also passed the bill out. The bill is now on the calendar and eligible for a floor vote. As he's done on several other issues, Representative Fitzwater has been very courageous, standing up for what he believes is right in this case. And I'd just like for him to give some remarks on that.
Thank you. You know, for the last 21 years, Jeff Mizanskey has been a model inmate in the Missouri Correctional Facilities. For those 21 years, Mr. Mizanskey has had 2 minor infractions, and I want to repeat, minor infractions, one for a messy floor and the other for putting a piece of mail in the wrong slot at the mailroom. You know, I think that we can all agree that those are not serious infractions worthy of further punishment. Mr. Mizanskey has paid for the nonviolent crimes he's committed with 21 years of his life. You know, I think we have an obligation to ensure that citizens are held accountable for their actions. We also have an obligation to ensure justice is served. And in this case, the punishment does not fit the crime, and a system designed to execute justice has instead been a source of injustice for Mr. Jeff Mizanskey. So Mr. Mizanskey has served a sentence far greater than the crime committed, and we need to see that justice is given to Mr. Mizanskey, and I am asking Governor Nixon for clemency in this case. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you all have any questions?
Has anyone standing up here had any meetings with Governor Nixon personally or with his staff about this particular issue?
Yes, last week.
I'm sorry, could you identify
Yes, we
yourself?
met with Governor Nixon's legal counsel last week.
And could you identify yourself?
I'm Dan Beats. I'm one of the attorneys representing Jeff.
And how did that, could you characterize how that meeting went? Did you get?
I think it was a good meeting, that we were assured that the governor was seriously considering granting some form of clemency.
Did they give you any indication why it's taken him so long to consider this?
Well, no. We are concerned about his health, and that's one point that we tried to make to the governor's attorney, is that Jeff's health is not good. Prison is a very unhealthy place to be. But Jeff specifically has a large tumor growing on one of his forearms, and I mean a large tumor. And anyone who's outside getting normal health care would have had that removed by now. Prison doctors have told him it's nothing to worry about, but no one who sees that would not worry about it. In addition to that, his leg was seriously injured in a work-related accident. Several years ago, the leg was not set, it was neglected. He now is crippled because of his time in prison. You know, prison is cruel. It's not unusual, but it is cruel punishment. And it is urgent that he be released as soon as possible.
I was going to say, I'm Amber Langston with Show Me Cannabis, and
Come on up to the mics if you're going to talk, please.
Sure, thanks. I'm Amber Langston, Deputy Director of Show Me Cannabis, and I did want to say it is worth mentioning that we did a similar action to this about a year ago with these Change.org petitions, and we delivered about 350,000. It's only grown since then, obviously, but we did meet with the governor's office about a year ago at this time, and so they've had it on their radar for quite a while, and we're hopeful that they won't take any more time making a decision on this. Thanks.
How do you respond to critics who would say he knew what the penalties were when he did the crimes, he should serve the time that he was risking when he did the crime? How would you respond to that kind of criticism?
He didn't know.
Would you please step up to the mic, please?
Sure. Very few people realize how incredibly harsh the Missouri marijuana laws are. And although that statute under which he was sentenced has been repealed effective January of 2017, it's still on the books right now. It allows people convicted of 2 prior drug-related felonies, which could be possessing 1.5 ounces, or even passing a joint I've seen charged as a felony. If you have 2 such convictions, your third one, you're facing 10 to life without parole, without possibility of probation or parole. An extremely harsh law. Jeff had no idea that law existed. He had no idea that anyone would be facing that type of punishment. He was clearly punished because he went to trial on his 3rd offense and was found guilty. Punishment would have been far less harsh if he pled guilty, but our system punishes people for going to trial.
Are there any other prisoners in the system right now that you feel deserves this sort of attention?
Well, there are a lot of people serving time for marijuana who don't need to be there, but Jeff's case is probably the worst.
I want to say there's a lot of us in the legislature that aren't for legalization of marijuana. But some of these punishments and penalties, when I was in the Senate, I represented 3 correction centers. A huge part of the population were drug offense related, and some of them were very minor. And in out state right now, we're giving penalties that in some other parts of the states wouldn't even get parole. I mean, probation, it's just, we have to take a look at it. The legislature's taken a look at it the last few years, and we're saying that we need to examine this. Do taxpayers really need to keep putting out $17,000 to $20,000 a year to incarcerate people that smoked pot 20 years ago? I mean, we have a former president. I've never smoked pot. We got a former president. I would have been smart enough to know to inhale, and he wasn't. But are we going to say that those are the people that, in the same time period that the person we're talking about today got convicted, that they were admitted they were smoking pot, and our current president was trying cocaine, and we're going to put these people in jail for life? Or we had one in my area where multiple years, I think it was 25 years they got for growing. I think it was 10 plants. Now there were some other circumstances, but we have to look if that situation was in another part of the state, they wouldn't have got any time. And does the taxpayers really want to pay for these types of criminals being in that long, that period of time? It's one thing to do some correction, it's another thing to put them away forever. And that's what I'm saying, there's a lot of us that aren't for legalization, but support a re-examination of these things.
How would you characterize that re-examination effort? Is that a serious movement within the legislature?
I don't know if it's serious yet, but at some point we'll talk about it. It's just what they were talking about, the city came out yesterday of St. Louis of how many of the gun crimes that are getting no penalty. That if the same crime would have taken place in St. Francis County, you'd have been booked 10 to 20 years. And so we have to take a look and say, is this, and there's an effect there. And so I think the legislature is willing to look at the fact. I don't think they're prepared to say we're going to legalize marijuana. I know that. But I think they're starting to have more and more examination of what we're paying for in our prisons. And as we take money away from our education system and other areas, mental health, and we're really going to keep somebody in high-level prison for the rest of their lives for marijuana violations, that's what I think that the legislature is starting to examine a little bit and say, is that right? Really?
You said the status of your bill right now, it's ready for a floor vote. With 2.5 weeks left, do you think anything's going to happen? And if not, what's your next plan?
Well, you don't hear legislators say this very often, but I really don't want my bill to pass. It would be wonderful if the governor would just take this bill out of consideration and grant clemency tomorrow. The sooner the better. So if we don't have to go down the legislative road, that's the ideal outcome for my bill. All right, well, thank you all for coming. We're going to go and present these now. Walk over to the governor's office. You're free to join us.
Yeah. Do you need help carrying stuff?
Yeah, do you guys need help carrying stuff? Tracy's got them all. Here's the staff.
I just want to make sure I said it right.
Do you guys want these to like stay in order? Good job, Jim. If you have any press that want copies of
Hey. Hey.
everybody go. Just gonna tweet this out.
Thank you, George.
Everybody, extra people to take signs. Yeah.
I try to take this seriously.
This is Tom Pendergast over here in the corner.
Okay.
And this is selling liquor to the Indians up here. That really puts a lot of And then, of course, Frankie and Johnny up here. You know, just a lot of scandalous stuff that offended our legislators' tender sensibilities.
Missouri history.
Yeah, yeah. The restaurateur up there.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And you know, the slaughterhouse. You don't usually see the actual slaughtering.
Right, yeah, yeah.
About to crack that cow in the head with a sledgehammer. Yeah, this is spectacular.
Stack them up over here.
Sorry, I can hear you.
Stop it. That's what you maybe meant with that.
It doesn't seem like you sit around too much.
No, I don't think so.